While this course doesn't have time to cover every major worldview in detail, the 2 lectures from last week covered an extremely large percentage of the world's population with broad strokes covering more than half of all people. Perhaps the largest group remaining would be those who believe that God does not exist. Ravi demonstrated in week 5 that atheism is far from united in its views. However, there are some basic assumptions and assertions that are common to naturalism and other forms of atheism that Professor John Lennox will address here. One minor note for this lecture, because there are so many different names and quotes offered, not all of them are included in the on-screen graphics, but will be listed in the accompanying notes.
The original meaning of the word naturalist is a student of nature, and it still keeps that meaning. But in this lecture, we're going to be concerned with a worldview called naturalism. That worldview was very well summed up by atheist astrophysicist Carl Sagan when he said the cosmos is all that is, was, or ever shall be. This is a very ancient view, going back to thinkers like the ancient Greek atomists and the Latin poet Lucretius. They believed that the natural world, the world of stars, of planets, earth, sea, and all that is in them, is all that exists. This is the worldview espoused by Marxism and secular humanism, and it's the dominant philosophy in the academy in the Western world. It is the core philosophy of the new atheists, whose ideas will be considered in another module. Naturalism is related to, but not identical with, materialism, although they are sometimes very hard to tell apart. Materialism is the view that only the material is real. It follows that materialists are naturalists, but there are naturalists who hold that mind is to be distinguished from matter in some way. They regard mind as a so-called emergent phenomenon. That is, mind is dependent on matter, but exhibits a certain higher level behavior that's not reducible to the lower level properties of matter. The important thing in our context is that naturalism, in common with materialism, insists, according to the Oxford Companion to Philosophy, that the world of nature should form a single sphere without incursions from outside by souls or spirits, divine or human. Whatever the differences, materialism and naturalism are therefore intrinsically atheistic, implacably opposed to supernaturalism. C.S. Lewis helps us understand the central idea of naturalism by considering the ways in which we use the word nature. He asks us to consider several sentences. For instance, firstly, are those his natural teeth or a set? Secondly, the dog in his natural state is covered with fleas. Thirdly, I love to get away from the city and be alone with nature. Lewis points out that there's a common thread of meaning here. The natural teeth are those which grow in the mouth. We do not have to design them, make them, or fit them. The dog's natural state is the one he will be in if no one takes soap and water and prevents it. The countryside, where nature reigns supreme, is the one where soil, weather, and vegetation produce the results unhelped and unimpeded by man. That is, what is natural is that which happens of itself, goes on of its own accord, what you will get if you make no attempt to stop it. Lewis concludes, what the naturalist believes is that the ultimate fact, the thing you can't go behind, is a vast process in space and time which is going on of its own accord. For the supernaturalist, nature is not the whole show. It is the creation of God who is not part of it. Inevitably, for the naturalist, the cosmos is a closed system of cause and effect. It has no overarching purpose, and it is not open to intervention from outside, since there isn't any outside. Richard Dawkins writes, an atheist, in the sense of philosophical naturalist, is somebody who believes there is nothing beyond the natural physical world, no supernatural creative intelligence lurking behind the observable universe. Now, we should note that this does not mean that naturalists necessarily believe that there is no superintelligence elsewhere in the cosmos. Some do. But they believe that that intelligence, however far advanced it may be in comparison with human intelligence, is not a supernatural intelligence. Like human intelligence, they believe that that superintelligence is also the end product of a purposeless evolutionary process, a consequence of what Richard Dawkins calls universal Darwinism. So for the naturalist, there is no supernatural God who made nature yet stands outside it, but who can intervene in its processes. In particular, miracles of the type recorded in the New Testament are impossible for naturalism. For them, death is the end, the permanent extinction of the person. And since naturalists hold that the universe is a closed system of cause and effect, it is not surprising that most of them are determinists. For instance, Stephen Hawking writes, "It is hard to see how free will can operate if our behaviour is determined by physical law. So it seems we are no more than biological machines, and free will is just an illusion." What is surprising is that many naturalists also hold that this determinism is somehow compatible with some sense of free will and human responsibility. Hawking, for instance, thinks that human behaviour is so complex that predicting it would be impossible, so that in practice we use, I quote, "the effective theory that people have free will." Finally, since there is no transcendence for naturalists, values for them are purely a human creation. The Humanist Manifesto puts it like this: "We affirm that moral values derive their source from human experience. Ethics is autonomous and situational, needing no theological or ideological sanction. Human life has meaning because we create and develop our futures." One of the main reasons this naturalistic worldview is so dominant in the Western world and in the academy is that naturalists claim that their worldview is the only one that is consistent with science. Indeed, philosopher Paul Kurtz, who drafted the Humanist Manifesto, writes, "What is common to naturalist philosophy is its commitment to science. Indeed, naturalism might be defined in its more general sense as the philosophical generalizations of the methods and conclusions of the sciences." So the suggestion here is this: if you start with science, you'll end up a naturalist. However, it is clear that for many people, the situation is the exact opposite. For instance, the immunologist George Klein writes, "I am not an agnostic, I am an atheist. My attitude is not based on science, but rather on faith. The absence of a creator, the non-existence of God, is my childhood faith, my adult belief, unshakable and holy." In his review of Carl Sagan's last book, the Harvard geneticist Richard Lewontin makes it abundantly clear that his naturalistic, indeed materialistic convictions do not derive from his science. Rather, it is that his materialism has consciously determined the nature of what he conceives science to be. He writes, "Our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggle between science and the supernatural. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just-so stories, because we have a prior commitment to materialism." It is not, says Lewontin, that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Lewontin's faith commitment to materialism is self-confessedly, therefore, not rooted in his science, but in something completely different. And that becomes very clear from what he next says. "Moreover," he writes, "that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door." This statement, be it noted, is a statement by a scientist, but it is not a statement of science. It is simply a statement of what Lewontin believes, a confession of his materialistic faith. It's critically important to be aware of what's going on here, since we are constantly told that science and belief in God are at war. This is clearly a simplistic and misleading reading of the situation, and an obvious way to counter it is to observe that there are leading scientists who believe in God and there are leading scientists who do not. There is a real conflict, though, not between science and belief in God, but between the worldviews of naturalism and theism. The point I'm making is this, that there are scientists on both sides. There are scientists who are naturalists and there are scientists who are theists. And the important thing is that we grasp that this is where the conflict is between two worldviews. And one of the difficulties of getting this point across is that many atheist scientists like Richard Dawkins and Peter Atkins, who are not philosophers, think that theism is a faith system, whereas their naturalism, being scientific, does not involve faith. This is nonsense. Their confusion arises from the fact that they have redefined faith to mean belief where there's no evidence. And since they, the naturalists, believe that their naturalism is based on scientific evidence, they do not need faith. This is very confused because the normal, everyday meaning of faith is trust, reliance on belief, and its degree of justification varies according to the evidence on which it is based. A bank official does not trust or believe you without evidence that you can pay back a loan you're requesting. And we usually have very good reasons to trust in, believe in our friends. In order to clear up this widespread confusion, what the naturalists should say is, our naturalism, though we believe it, is not a blind faith, it is based on scientific evidence. Your belief in God, however, is a blind faith, but then they would be wrong if they said that. The irony is, along with many other scientists, I would claim that scientific evidence is actually one of the main reasons why I believe in God. All worldviews are belief systems. They all involve faith. The key question, therefore, is, what is the warrant for that faith? What is the evidence that a particular worldview is true? Does it satisfy the criteria of non-contradiction? Or the coherence test of truth? Does it correspond to reality? So let us now put these questions to naturalism. What warrants belief in naturalism? Since naturalists believe by definition that nature is the ultimate reality, they're forced to conclude that the universe explains itself. Or to put it another way, the universe must be fully explicable in terms of its basic material, mass energy. Peter Atkins puts it more colourfully, one might even say pungently. Science has no need of purpose. All the extraordinary, wonderful richness of the world can be expressed as growth from the dunghill of purposeless, interconnected corruption. Naturalism is, as we see from what Atkins has just said, essentially reductionistic. It attempts to explain the world bottom up, for the simple reason that there's no top, no intelligent creator to be involved in top-down causation. To be more precise, naturalism espouses what is called ontological reductionism, whose presence is often indicated by the telltale words, nothing but. For instance, Richard Dawkins writes, the universe is nothing but a collection of atoms in motion. Stephen Hawking says, we are no more than, that is, nothing but biological machines. This is naturalistic reductionism. Of course, we can all admit that the universe is a collection of atoms in motion and that we are biological machines. But is that all there is to it? That's the question. Naturalism believes it is, and that in the end the physical sciences will provide us with a so-called theory of everything. What easily gets forgotten by naturalists is that the physical sciences themselves are a result of research done by conscious minds. It's here that the real problem starts. Thomas Nagel writes, consciousness is the most conspicuous obstacle to a comprehensive naturalism that relies only on the resources of physical science. If we take this problem seriously and follow out its implications, it threatens to unravel, in Nagel's opinion, the entire naturalistic world picture. So let us then follow out some of the implications and see why they are so threatening to naturalism. The first thing to notice is that human reason did not create the universe, unless we are extreme idealists, a philosophy that has not exactly endeared itself to many scientists. This point is so obvious that at first it might seem to be trivial, but actually it's of fundamental importance when we come to assess the validity of our own cognitive faculties. For not only did we not create the universe, but we didn't create our own powers of reason either. We can develop our rational faculties by use, but we did not originate them. How can it be then that what goes on in our tiny heads can give us anything near a true account of the reality of the universe? How is it that a mathematical equation thought up in the human mind of a mathematician can correspond to the workings of the universe out there? It was reflection on this idea that led Einstein to say, the only incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. And similar reflection stimulated Physics Nobel Prize winner Eugene Wigner to write a famous paper entitled The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences. The question we're addressing boils down to this: what authority and hence what reliability has our reason? Are our cognitive faculties deliberately designed to enable us to discover, recognize, and believe the truth? Now, these are very important questions, since all possible knowledge depends on the validity of reasoning. Now, I am well aware that naturalists will choke on the word design, since they deny outright any deliberate design by a creator. But even they believe that reason has a proper function and purpose in the same sense as, say, the heart does. The heart's proper purpose is to pump the blood around the body, whereas a cancer's growth has no proper purpose or function within the human body. It results from purposeless, chaotic growth. Moreover, naturalists like Richard Dawkins inadvertently reveal their belief that the faculty of reason is in this sense designed to fulfill the purpose of discovering the truth when they assert that belief in the existence of God results from a misuse of reason. Obviously, if reason had no proper function, no one could be accused of misusing it. Yet, most naturalists, like Dawkins, follow Freud's contention that all the apparently rational arguments put forward by believers for the existence of God are in fact driven and corrupted by a hidden subconscious wish fulfillment mechanism. The desire to construct for themselves a crutch to help them through life's difficulties, whereas reason, if uncorrupted, would achieve its proper purpose and discover the truth, namely atheism. It is in that connection that Richard Dawkins makes the astonishing claim that religious belief comes about by a misfiring of evolution. The irony of this whole position becomes abundantly apparent as soon as one inquires about the origin of the human faculty of reason. For naturalists hold that the driving force of evolution which eventually produced our human cognitive faculties, reason included, was not primarily concerned with truth at all, but with survival. And we all know what has generally happened and still does to truth when individuals or commercial enterprises or nations, motivated by what Dawkins calls their selfish genes, feel themselves threatened and struggle for survival. Naturalists have signally failed to appreciate the skeptical implications of the reductionism, for they are essentially obliged to regard thought as some kind of neurophysiological phenomenon. Now, from the evolutionary perspective, the neurophysiology might well be adaptive, but why would one think for a moment that the beliefs caused by that neurophysiology should be mostly true? After all, as chemist J.B.S. Haldane pointed out long ago, if the thoughts in my mind are just the motions of atoms in my brain, a mechanism that has arisen by mindless, unguided processes, why should I believe anything my brain tells me, including the fact that it is made of atoms? In particular, what grounds are there to believe that naturalism is true? In other words, the naturalist's unguided evolutionary theory undermines their naturalism. Stephen Hawking did not take this into account when he wrote in The Grand Design, the fact that we human beings, who are ourselves mere collections of fundamental particles of nature, have come close to an understanding of the laws governing us, and our universe is a great triumph. Hawking doesn't seem to realize that if we are nothing but mere collections of fundamental particles, then our capacity to understand anything, let alone understand the laws of nature, is inconceivable. By contrast, British historian of European thought John Gray sees the issue very clearly. He says, modern humanism is the faith, note the word, that through science humankind can know the truth and so be free. But if Darwin's theory of natural selection is true, this is impossible. The human mind serves evolutionary success, not truth. Now, in light of this, we might well ask, how can naturalists claim that it is on the one hand rational to believe in the theory that the evolution of our faculty of reason was not directed for the purpose of discovering the truth, and on the other hand claim that it is irrational to believe that our faculty of reason was designed and created by our Maker to enable us to understand and believe the truth? American philosopher Alvin Plantinga sums up the position very well. If Dawkins is right, he writes, that we are the product of mindless, unguided natural processes, then he has given us strong reason to doubt the reliability of human cognitive faculties, and therefore inevitably to doubt the validity of any belief that they produce, including Dawkins' own science and his atheism. And here comes the important statement. Dawkins' biology and his belief in naturalism would therefore appear to be at war with each other in a conflict that has nothing at all to do with God. The English philosopher R.A. Collingwood once said that materialism has the characteristic of writing itself a large cheque on income it had not yet received, making the mind coterminous with the brain, reducing thoughts to nothing but neurophysiology, is a prime example of this tendency, as it spells not only an end to God as naturalists think, but it also inevitably leads to the demise of science, rationality, and belief in truth itself. It is ultimately nihilistic. Putting this very important point the other way round, eminent German philosopher Robert Spemann points out that we are faced not with a choice between God and science, as naturalists would have us think, but with a choice either to put faith in God or to give up on understanding the universe. That is, if there's no God, there can be no science. Of course, Spemann is not suggesting that naturalists cannot do science. That would be completely false. What he's saying is that if we eliminate God, in the end, logically, there is not only no rational basis for science, there's no rational basis for truth. There is no rationality. An American philosopher, Thomas Nagel, has written this: evolutionary naturalism implies that we shouldn't take any of our convictions seriously, including the scientific world picture on which evolutionary naturalism itself depends. C.S. Lewis saw the problem very clearly long ago. Unless human reasoning is valid, he wrote, no science can be true. It follows that no account of the universe can be true unless that account leaves it possible for our thinking to be a real insight. A theory which explained everything else in the whole universe, but which made it impossible to believe that our thinking was valid, would be utterly out of court. For that theory would itself have been reached by thinking, and if thinking is not valid, that theory would of course be itself demolished. It would have destroyed its own credentials. It would be an argument which proved that no argument was sound, a proof that there are no such things as proofs, which is nonsense. Naturalism, then, has a fatal flaw. Its ontological reductionism undermines the foundations of the very rationality that's needed to construct or understand or believe in any kind of argument whatsoever, including those that are used to defend naturalism. Naturalism, therefore, does not simply shoot itself in the foot, it shoots itself in the brain. Another aspect of this fatal flaw in naturalism is that its claim to explain everything in terms of the physical sciences overlooks the fact that the concept of information has come to play a central role in those sciences. We live in the information age, in which we have discovered that DNA is an information-bearing macromolecule. However, information, though carried on material, is itself immaterial. And the physical sciences cannot cope with the immaterial, nor can naturalism. By contrast, biblical theism is completely coherent in its explanation of why the universe is scientifically intelligible and why immaterial information exists. The Bible teaches that an immaterial, intelligent God is ultimately responsible as creator both for the existence of the universe and the existence of the human mind. Human beings are made in his image, the image of a rational personal creator, and that is why they can understand the universe, at least in part. It is therefore not surprising that there is a close link between theism and the rise of modern science in the 16th and 17th centuries. Parallel to naturalism's fruitless attempt to derive rationality from non-rationality is its effort to derive morality without transcendence. The basic problem is clear. How can a nature that is ultimately mindless and impersonal and therefore amoral, how can it impose any sense of obligation or morality upon us? The Scottish Enlightenment philosopher David Hume observed that authors in moral philosophy often advance arguments for what ought to be on the basis of factual statements about what is. They appear, that is, to derive imperative conclusions from indicative premises. According to Hume, this is just not possible. Atheist Nobel Prize winner Jacques Monod confirms this view. One of the great problems of philosophy, he writes, is the relationship between the realm of knowledge and the realm of values. Knowledge is what is, and values are what ought to be. I would say, he goes on, that all traditional philosophies, up to and including communism, have tried to derive the ought from the is. This is impossible. If it is true that there's no purpose in the universe, that man is a pure accident, you cannot derive any ought from is. Nonetheless, like perpetual motion, the coaxing of an ought out of an is still being attempted in the face of all the odds. The reason is, of course, that those who are committed to naturalism as a philosophy have to believe by definition that it can be done, for the simple reason that according to their theory there is no other admissible possibility. And yet, if naturalism is true, it surely abolishes all moral categories, as Richard Dawkins has seen. He wrote, in a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely those properties that we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. Now, in light of this clear statement of the logical consequences of naturalism, the person who still attempts to derive morality from nature is doomed to failure. As C.S. Lewis says, he is still trying to get a conclusion in the imperative mood out of premises in the indicative mood, and though he continues trying to all eternity, he cannot succeed, for the thing is impossible. We should finally say something about naturalism's claim that science rules out the supernatural by showing that miracles are impossible, and so in particular demonstrating the falsehood of the central claims of the New Testament, that God became incarnate in Jesus Christ, who proved himself to be the Son of God by the resurrection. This allegation is usually traced to David Hume, who claimed that miracles are violations of the laws of nature and hence scientifically impossible. Therefore, they could only be believed by primitive people who were ignorant of the laws of nature. Hume denies miracle because miracle would go against the uniform laws of nature. But elsewhere, quite ironically, he denies the very uniformity of nature. He famously argues that just because the sun has been observed to rise in the morning for thousands of years, it doesn't mean we can be sure that it will rise tomorrow. This is an example of the problem of induction. On the basis of past experience, you cannot predict the future, says Hume. But if that were true, what does that imply in particular? Suppose Hume is right and no dead man has ever risen up from the grave through the whole of Earth's history so far. By his own argument, he still cannot be sure that a dead man will not rise up tomorrow. That being so, he cannot rule out miracle. And of course that argument works backwards in time as well. So what has now become of Hume's insistence on the laws of nature and its uniformity? He has destroyed the very basis on which he tries to deny the possibility of miracles. In any case, if as Hume thought we can infer no regularities, it would be impossible even to speak of laws of nature, let alone the uniformity of nature with respect to those laws. And if nature is not uniform, then using the uniformity of nature as an argument against miracles is simply absurd. As to the credulity of primitive peoples in believing miracles like the resurrection of Jesus, historian Tom Wright says this: ancient paganism contains all kinds of theories, but whenever resurrection is mentioned, the answer is a firm negative. We know that doesn't happen. This is worth stressing in today's context. One sometimes hears it said or implied that prior to the rise of modern science, people believed in all kinds of odd things like resurrection, but that now, with 200 years of scientific research on our side, we know that dead people stay dead. This is ridiculous. The evidence and the conclusion, says Wright, was massive and was massively drawn in the ancient world as it is today. Resurrections do not happen. So to suppose then that Christianity was born in a pre-scientific, credulous and ignorant world is simply false to the facts. The ancient world knew the law of nature as well as we do, that dead bodies do not get up out of graves. Christianity won its way by dint of the sheer weight of evidence that one man had actually risen from the dead. And we must now come to this idea that miracles are violations of the laws of nature, because that involves another serious fallacy, which C.S. Lewis brilliantly illustrated by a simple analogy. If this week I put £1,000 in the drawer of my desk and add 2,000 next week and another 1,000 the week thereafter, the laws of arithmetic allow me to predict that the next time I come to my drawer, I shall find £4,000. But suppose when I next open the drawer, I find only £1,000. What shall I conclude? That the laws of arithmetic have been broken? Certainly not. I might more reasonably conclude that some thief has broken the laws of England and stolen £3,000 out of my drawer. One thing it would be ludicrous to claim in this situation is that the laws of arithmetic make it impossible to believe in the existence of such a thief or the possibility of his intervention. On the contrary, it is the normal workings of those laws that have exposed the existence and activity of the thief. And this analogy also helps us to understand that the scientific use of the word law is not the same as the legal use, where we often think of a law as constraining someone's actions. There is no sense in which the laws of arithmetic constrain the thief in our story. Newton's law of gravitation tells me that if I drop an apple, it will fall towards the centre of the earth. But that law does not prevent someone intervening and catching the apple as it descends. In other words, the law predicts what will happen provided there's no change in the conditions under which the experiment is conducted. Thus, from the theistic perspective, the laws of nature predict what is bound to happen if God does not intervene. Though, of course, it is no act of theft if the Creator intervenes in his own creation. It's plainly fallacious to argue that the laws of nature make it impossible for us to believe in the existence of God and the possibility of his intervention. It would be like claiming that an understanding of the laws of the internal combustion engine makes it impossible to believe that the designer of a motor car or one of his mechanics could or would intervene and remove the cylinder head. Of course they could intervene. Moreover, this intervention would not destroy those laws. The very same laws that explain why the engine worked with the cylinder head on would now explain why it does not work with the head removed. It's therefore inaccurate and misleading to say with Hume that miracles violate the laws of nature. Once more, C.S. Lewis is very helpful. If God annihilates or creates or deflects a unit of matter, he has created a new situation at that point. Immediately, all nature domiciles this new situation, makes it at home in her realm, adapts all other events to it. it finds itself conforming to all the laws. If God creates, for instance, a miraculous spermatozoon in the body of a virgin, it does not proceed to break any laws. The laws at once take over. Nature is ready. Pregnancy follows according to all the normal laws, and 9 months later a child is born. In this vein, we could say that it is a law of nature that human beings do not rise again from the dead by some natural mechanism. But Christians do not claim that Christ rose from the dead by such a mechanism. They claim that he rose from the dead by supernatural power. By themselves, the laws of nature cannot rule out that possibility. When a miracle takes place, it is the laws of nature and our knowledge of them that alert us to the fact that it is a miracle. It's very important to grasp that Christians do not deny the laws of nature as Hume implies they do. It is an essential part of the Christian position to believe in the laws of nature as descriptions of those regularities and cause-effect relationships that were built into the universe by its creator and according to which the universe normally operates. If we did not know those regularities and laws, we could never recognize a miracle, even if we saw one. Ironically enough, Christians will argue, in fact, that it is only belief in a creator that gives us a satisfactory ground for believing in the uniformity of nature in the first place. In denying that there is a creator, the atheists are kicking away the basis of their own argument. And that brings us back to our main criticism of naturalism. Lewis again. If all that exists in nature, the great mindless interlocking event, if our own deepest convictions are merely the byproducts of an irrational process, then clearly there's not the slightest ground for supposing that our sense of fitness and our consequent faith in uniformity tell us anything about a reality external to ourselves. Our convictions are simply a fact about us, like the colour of our hair. If naturalism is true, we have no reason to trust our conviction that nature is uniform. It can be trusted only if quite a different metaphysic is true. If the deepest thing in reality, the fact, which is the source of all other factitude, is a thing in some degree like ourselves, if it is a rational spirit, and we derive our rational spirituality from it, then indeed our conviction can be trusted. Our repugnance to disorder is derived from nature's creator and ours. Thus, excluding the possibility of miracle and making nature and its processes an absolute in the name of science ends up once more by removing all grounds for trusting in the rationality of science in the first place. On the other hand, regarding nature as only part of a greater reality which includes nature's intelligent creator, God, that gives a rational justification for belief in the orderliness of nature. And it was that conviction that led to the rise of modern science. Naturalism, therefore, to sum up, turns out to be a deceptive worldview. It appeals to many people because it claims to be objective and scientific. It appears to free people of the trammels of religion and the supernatural and to give them a central role in creating their own values. And yet, on inspection, it proves to be anti-intellectual in the most basic sense of all. In the end, of course, not only those of us who do science, but all of us have to choose the presupposition with which we start. There are not many options, essentially just two. Naturalism thinks that human intelligence ultimately owes its origin to mindless matter. Theism teaches that there is an intelligent creator. I find it very strange that some people claim that it is their intelligence that leads them to prefer the first to the second.